When I was 10, my uncle taught me how to hold on, and I never really let go after that. Not to a man, not to a tear, not even to the version of myself that wanted to be soft. Hello there, I'm Loretta Dean. I'm 67 years old, and I'm standing at the front door of Dean's Hardware and Building Supply with a keyring that feels heavier than it should. 40 years of keys. 40 years of opening up before sunrise, of locking up long after everyone else went home, of carrying the weight of a place that became more than a business. Tomorrow morning, I hand these keys to my kids. Retirement. The word sounds clean, like a fresh coat of paint. Like it should be simple, but nothing about this moment is simple, not when the concrete under my boots holds more memories than most people pack into a lifetime. The parking lot is still empty. The air has that early morning bite to it. Toledo showing off its gray side even when the sun tries to be polite. The big storefront windows reflect my face back at me, lined, weathered, and calm in the way people call strong when they don't know what else to say. My hands are wrapped around the keyring, knuckles stiff, fingers marked with little scars and old damage. One finger bends slightly wrong from a table saw mishap back in '92. The calluses aren't temporary anymore. They're part of me, like tree rings. A woman like me isn't supposed to get sentimental. That's what my uncle would have said. You do the job. You don't waste time feeling sorry for yourself. If you've got a problem, you handle it. So I came here alone before the ceremony, before the mayor and the Chamber of Commerce and the local reporters, before my son Michael walks through these doors with that half smile he gets when he's proud but doesn't want to act like it, before Sarah arrives, my daughter, in every way that matters, even if we don't share blood, before I look at them and officially step aside, because there's something I never said out loud, something I kept buried like a tool you don't touch unless you have to, wrapped in oily cloth and hidden in the back of the drawer. For years, I believed my Uncle Jack Dean used me. I believed he dragged a little girl out of bed before sunrise, shoved her into work boots, and worked her like cheap labor because he was hard and bitter and didn't know the difference between discipline and cruelty. I hated him for it. Not the polite kind of hate people confess in therapy and move on from. I mean the kind that sits in your chest like a block of wet cement and slowly hardens. The kind that makes you flinch when you hear a truck door slam. The kind that makes you swear you'll never be like him, then catches you using his words in your own mouth 20 years later. I thought I understood my story for a long time. A deadbeat father, a worn-out mother, a tough childhood, a rough uncle, a brief marriage that turned sour, a kid to raise alone, a job that became a career, a business that became a legacy. Neat, labeled, settled. And then, right when I thought I was finally closing the chapter, life pulled the floor out from under me. It wasn't a storm. It wasn't a car crash. It wasn't even a betrayal from a husband. It was a box, a simple cardboard box, tied with twine, the kind you'd barely glance at in a storage room. And what I found inside that box rewrote everything I thought I knew about the man I hated most. That's why I'm telling this now, standing here with the keys in my hand. Because if I don't say it before I walk away, it'll stay lodged inside me forever, like a nail you can't pull out without tearing something important. I unlock the front door and step inside. The smell hits me first. Sawdust, metal, a faint chemical edge from paint and sealant. It's familiar enough to feel like home, and sharp enough to remind me this place was built on hard work and harder choices. The overhead lights buzz as they come on, row by row, washing the aisles in pale brightness. Boxes of screws organized by size and purpose. Specialty tools hung in tidy alignment. The lumber section, Michael, expanded 3 years ago. Informational cards I insisted on creating because if you're going to sell someone a tool, you'd better teach them what it's for. I walk slow, like I'm letting the building speak. I run my fingertips along a shelf end cap, feeling the smooth edge where someone sanded it down properly instead of leaving it rough. That small detail matters to me. Always has. People think businesses are built by big moments, loans, deals, grand openings. That's not how it really works. A business is built by 1,000 small choices made the right way when nobody's watching. The right screw instead of close enough. The level checked twice. The inventory counted even when you're tired. The decision to tell a customer the truth even if it costs you a sale. A lot of that, more than I used to admit, came from my uncle. I pass the wall of photos near the front. We call it Dean Builders. Hundreds of pictures, women holding drills, standing beside decks they built, kitchens they repaired, sheds they framed, faces flushed with exhaustion and pride. Their eyes always stop me, because I know that look. I've seen it in mirrors after long days. I've seen it in women who walk in here nervous, apologizing for not knowing what a stud finder is, and walk out with their shoulders higher because someone finally treated them like they weren't stupid. The building blocks program started small. One workshop, a handful of women, some of them with bruises they tried to hide, some with kids clinging to their legs, all of them with the same fear lodged behind their ribs. What if I can't do it? What if I have to stay because I have no other choice? My uncle would have hated the softness of how I run those workshops. He would have scoffed at the coffee in the back room, the patient explanations, the gentle jokes. But the point wasn't softness. The point was the same thing he tried to carve into me with silence and hard work. Choice. That's what he was obsessed with. That's what I didn't understand until it was too late to confront him about it. I reach my office and push open the door. The air is still. The desk is neat because I can't stand clutter. A 3-ring binder sits on the corner. The transition plan. Michael's handwriting in the margins. Sarah's sticky notes, color-coded. They've been running day to day for years now, but tomorrow it becomes official. On the wall behind my desk is the history. Old photos of the original storefront, the first group of workshop participants, Michael at his college graduation, and in the center, like a quiet accusation, is something I kept framed on purpose, a photocopy of a bank book. The first time I saw it, my hands shook so badly I could barely hold it open. I didn't understand what I was looking at first, just numbers, dates, deposits. But the date at the top of the first page was May 1971, the same month my uncle first knocked on our door just after sunrise and told me to get dressed. The first deposit was $8.50, then $10.75, then more. Week after week, like a heartbeat. And the final balance, years later, sat there like a punch to the throat. $6,742.18. A fortune for a single mother in 1984. Money that could have saved me when I was drowning. Money I didn't even know existed. The day I learned it was mine, I had to sit down because my knees went weak. It didn't make sense. Because in my memory, Uncle Jack didn't pay me. He worked me. He barked orders and watched me bleed and blister and sweat. He told me no crying. He told me my complaints were useless. He inspected my work like he was waiting for me to fail. I grew up thinking I was free labor. A little girl he toughened up because he enjoyed the control, or because he didn't know how to be kind. And then that bank book appeared like a trapdoor under the story I'd been telling myself for decades. There's a knock at the office door. Not loud, not demanding. A polite tap. My chest tightens anyway, just for half a second, the way it always does when I'm pulled out of my own head. Then Sarah peeks in, smiling. "Sorry," she says. "Just checking, did you come in early again?" "I always come in early," I say automatically. She laughs, but her eyes soften. Sarah's got the kind of empathy you can't fake. She can read a room the way I read a blueprint. "You okay?" she asks. I nod once, just taking one last look. She steps closer and leans on the doorframe. Michael's already on his way. He's pretending he's not nervous, but he is. "He gets that from me," I mutter. Sarah smiles wider. "He gets a lot from you." There are a dozen things I could say. I could tell her to go finish the checklist. I could tell her to stop hovering. I could hide behind the usual gruffness that keeps people from asking questions I don't want to answer. But my eyes flick back to the framed bank book, and for a moment, the past presses up against the present so hard, it feels like I can't breathe. "Sarah?" I say, and my voice surprises me by sounding a little rough. "Yeah? I ever tell you why I started all this? The workshops, the program." She tilts her head. "You've told me pieces, not the whole thing." She waits. She's good at that, not filling the silence, letting it do its job. I clear my throat once, like it'll help. "When I was 10, I say slowly, my uncle started taking me to job sites. Every Saturday, then weekdays, brick, mortar, lumber, all of it. And I hated him. I thought he was punishing me." Sarah's expression changes. She's heard the outline of that story. But not like this. Not with my hands wrapped around the edge of the desk, like I'm bracing myself. "After he died," I continue, "I found out he'd been paying me the whole time. Not cash. He put it in a bank account in my name, week after week, for years. Sarah's mouth parts slightly. What? I didn't know, I say, the words sharper now. I didn't know until it was too late to ask him why. Too late to throw the bank book at his grave and demand an explanation. My throat tightens again. And that wasn't even the worst part, I add. Sarah's eyes flick from my face to the framed copy and back. What was the worst part? She asks, quietly. I don't answer right away, because the worst part wasn't the money. It was the notebooks, the journals, the words my uncle never said to my face but wrote down in jagged, uneven handwriting, line after line, as if the page could hold what his mouth never could. I look at Sarah and feel something I don't like to feel exposed. I'm telling you this, I say, because tomorrow I'm handing over everything, and I don't want to leave without saying the truth out loud at least once. Sarah nods slowly. Okay, I swallow. I thought my uncle was just mean, I say. I thought he was carving the softness out of me, because he didn't respect it. But when I read what he wrote, I realized he was trying to save me, in the only way he knew how. Sarah's eyes shine a little, but she doesn't interrupt. And I don't cry. I don't. Not then. Because even now, after all this time, that old rule still lives in my bones. No tears on the job site. But I can feel the story pressing up inside me, heavy and urgent, demanding to be told from the beginning, the real beginning. The one that started the morning after my 10th birthday, when a sharp knock on our door dragged me out of bed and into a life I never asked for. A life that would cost me my childhood. A life that would later save me. And a truth that would only reveal itself when the man who held it was already gone. I take a slow breath and straighten my shoulders. Let's get ready, I tell Sarah, because that's what I do when emotions start getting too close. But as she steps out, I glance one more time at the bank book on the wall, and I know exactly where this story has to go next. Back to Toledo. Back to 1971. Back to the morning I opened the door in my pajamas and saw Uncle Jack standing there like a storm wrapped in denim and flannel. And the first thing he ever said to me that changed everything: get dressed. It was 1,971 inches Toledo, Ohio, a city that still believed in itself back then. Steel and glass rolled out of factories like promises, and even the smoke in the air felt purposeful, like proof that work mattered. I grew up on the east side, in a neighborhood where every house looked tired in the same way. 2 bedrooms, peeling paint, sagging porches patched one board at a time. My mother, Ellen Dean, kept promising she'd repaint the house next summer, the way people promise themselves things they know won't happen. When I was 5, my father walked out, not dramatically. No suitcase slammed down, no tearful goodbye, just a screaming match one night. A door that closed too hard, and then silence that stretched on until it became permanent. We heard later he'd gone to Detroit with a woman he met at a bar. Another man who couldn't handle responsibility. Another story no one on our street found surprising. Mom was left with 3 kids and a stack of bills that never stopped growing. I was the oldest. Tommy was 8, Diane was 6. Being the oldest meant I learned early that childhood was optional when adults failed. Mom worked double shifts at Denny's waitressing mornings, covering nights whenever someone called out. She came home smelling like coffee and grease, ankles swollen, shoulders slumped. On good nights, she brought leftover pie. On bad nights, she fell asleep at the kitchen table with envelopes spread out like a losing hand. She'd been pretty once. I'd seen the pictures. Bright eyes, a soft smile. By the time I was 10, worry had carved itself into her face permanently. The kindness that kept us afloat came from her brother, my Uncle Jack. Jack Dean never married, never had kids. He lived alone in a small house across town and worked as a bricklayer and general contractor. He'd gone to Vietnam and come back in '68 with a limp and eyes that had seen too much and said too little. Unlike my father, Jack stayed. When Dad left, Jack started coming around more often. Groceries, repairs. A little cash slipped to Mom when he thought I wasn't watching. He fixed broken steps, leaky faucets, anything that gave out under the weight of our lives. He wasn't warm. He wasn't gentle. But he was there. To a 10-year-old girl, that distinction didn't mean much yet. At 10, my world was small. School, home, making grilled cheese for my siblings, stretching a can of soup into dinner, getting grass stains out of jeans like a professional laundress. School was my quiet escape. I was good at it, especially math and science, but I learned fast not to advertise that. Smart girls weren't popular where I grew up. My teacher, Mrs. Gonzalez, sometimes gave me extra books and told me I could be something if I worked hard. I nodded and smiled, but something felt vague and unreachable. Girls like me didn't become things. We survived. The future, as far as anyone told us, was already decided. Finish high school, find a husband, have kids, keep the house running. If you were lucky, you married a man who didn't drink too much or disappear when things got hard. My friends talked about boys and makeup and wedding dresses. I joined in because that's what you did. But even then, something felt wrong about that path. Like I was wearing shoes that didn't fit and pretending not to notice the blisters. The day everything changed was the morning after my 10th birthday. Mom had managed a small cake and a new pair of jeans. Tommy and Diane made cards with crayons and construction paper. For one rare evening, Mom laughed more than she sighed. The next morning, a sharp knock ripped me out of sleep. I stumbled to the door in my pajamas, hair a mess, eyes still foggy. When I opened it, Uncle Jack stood on the porch like he'd been carved there. Faded jeans, flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up despite the chill, heavy boots crusted with old mud and cement. His face was already set in that serious, unreadable way he always wore. "Get dressed," he said. "Wear pants. Bring a jacket." I blinked at him. "What for?" "Taking you with me today." No explanation. No discussion. I glanced toward my mother's bedroom, instinctively searching for permission. Jack shook his head once. "Already talked to your mom." "How long?" 15 minutes, Loretta." Then he stepped back onto the porch and lit a cigarette, turning away like the conversation was over because, to him, it was. I dressed fast. Jeans, a t-shirt, my school sneakers. I pulled my hair into a ponytail and splashed water on my face, heart thudding with confusion and something like fear. Uncle Jack didn't like waiting. Outside, he stood by his truck, an old Ford pickup that might have once been blue. Rust and Bondo covered most of it now. The bed was full of tools, heavy bags, and bricks under a tarp. "Hop in," he said. The inside of the truck smelled like cigarettes, coffee, and something damp and earthy I didn't recognize, yet wet cement. The radio played low, some country song about hard times. We drove in silence. I watched the city change through the window, from our tired east side streets to bigger houses, through downtown, still quiet at that hour. Then toward the west side, where new construction was happening, bare foundations and skeletal frames rising from empty lots. He pulled into a site already buzzing with activity. Men in work clothes moved with purpose, unloading tools, shouting measurements. Jack shut off the engine and finally looked at me. "Listen up," he said. "You're going to learn something today. Something real, not the crap they teach you at school." I nodded, unsure why my stomach felt tight. "They're going to look at you funny," he continued, jerking his head toward the workers. "Ignore it. You stick by me. You do exactly what I tell you. No questions, no complaining." "Yes, Uncle Jack. One more thing," he added, eyes sharp. "No crying. Ever. Not on my job site. You got a problem, you tell me private. Understand?" "Yes, Uncle Jack." And just like that, we stepped out of the truck. I didn't know it then, but I had just walked into the place that would define my life for the next 6 years, and in ways I wouldn't understand until decades later. The rest of it too. Uncle Jack Dean didn't explain himself. He never did. And that was the beginning of everything. Uncle Jack was a man built out of silence and strain, 6 feet tall, shoulders wide enough to carry plywood like it weighed nothing, hands thick and scarred, fingers swollen at the joints, skin like old leather that had learned to survive weather and tools and time. His hair was already salt and pepper, even though he was barely in his 40s, cut short the same way he'd worn it in Vietnam. His face stayed permanently tanned, lines carved deep from years under open sky. But it was his eyes that unsettled me most. Pale blue, almost gray. They saw everything, measured everything, and gave nothing away. When he looked at you, it felt like being weighed, not judged, exactly, but assessed. Could you handle this? Would you break? Would you quit? He didn't smile much. When he did, it was brief, almost accidental, like it surprised him too. His voice matched the rest of him, low, rough, and efficient. Uncle Jack spoke like words cost money. He never used 10 when 2 would do. That first day, I learned more about him by watching him work than from all the years he'd shown up at our house with groceries and quiet help. On the job site, Jack wasn't the foreman. That was a red-faced man named Bill who liked to shout and wave his arms. But when Jack spoke, the men listened. When he pointed, they moved. He didn't need to raise his voice. Authority clung to him naturally, like dust on boots. I hovered close, trying not to get in the way. His hands fascinated me, massive but precise. He could lay a brick perfectly aligned, then adjust a level with a touch so gentle it didn't seem possible. Every movement was economical, practiced, as if his body knew what to do before his mind bothered to think about it. He worked like someone who belonged exactly where he was. The only time I saw a crack in that armor was during lunch. While the other men clustered together, talking loud about sports and women and politics, Jack often ate alone, sitting in the cab of his truck. Once, when he sent me to grab something from the bed, I glanced through the window. He was reading. Not a newspaper, not a car magazine, a paperback book, the cover worn soft from use. The sight stuck with me because it didn't fit, like seeing a bear do arithmetic. Later, I learned Jack had left school after 5th grade. Family needed money, childhood was optional. But somewhere along the way, he taught himself to read, really read. History, westerns, anything he could get his hands on. He hid it from the other men, ashamed of seeming soft or uppity in a world where a working man wasn't supposed to enjoy books. He built his mind the same way he built walls, quietly, deliberately, and without asking permission. I didn't know any of that at 10 years old. What I knew was that from the moment we arrived, I was put to work. First cleaning tools, then fetching things, then learning to mix mortar in a wheelbarrow. Hold the trowel like this, Jack said, demonstrating. Not like a pencil, like it's part of your arm. My hand was small and soft, barely able to wrap around the handle. The weight of it made my wrist ache almost immediately. It hurts, I complained once. Early on, Jack looked at me, expression unreadable. Going to hurt worse tomorrow, he said. Then less the day after. Then not at all. He was right. By the end of that first day, my hands were blistered raw. My arms felt like rubber. My back screamed every time I bent down. Dust and mortar clung to my clothes and skin like I'd been dipped in it. My new sneakers were ruined. When he dropped me off that evening, I didn't say much. I went straight to the bathtub and cried where no one could see, soaking in water that turned gray around me. The next morning, I could barely move. Every muscle protested. The blisters on my palms had popped, leaving angry red patches that burned when I touched anything. How was it with Uncle Jack? My mother asked carefully over breakfast. Okay, I lied. Just cleaned up and stuff. She studied me, noticing the way I winced, lifting my glass of milk. He can be tough, she said. But he means well. I nodded, not understanding how pain translated into help, but knowing better than to argue. The next Saturday, Jack was back before dawn. And the next, and the next. Soon it was every Saturday, all day, wherever Jack was working that week. When summer vacation came, he started picking me up on weekdays too. Got a small job, he'd say. Need a helper. My mother never objected. Maybe she was too tired to fight it. Maybe she thought learning a trade would be good for me. Maybe she was just grateful for the extra cash Jack slipped her when he thought I wasn't looking. The men got used to seeing me a skinny girl in work boots, hauling bricks alongside men 3 times my size. Some were uncomfortable. Job site's no place for a kid, one muttered once. Especially not a girl. My niece, Jack said flatly. My business. And that was the end of it. Others were kinder. Old Hank, a carpenter with a white beard, taught me how to respect a circular saw. It'll bite you if you don't, he warned. Miguel, a tile setter from Puerto Rico, showed me how to make perfect corners. Is art, he insisted. Not just job, but most of my education came from Jack. He was relentless. Nothing was ever good enough. Praise didn't exist. If something was crooked, I tore it out and did it again. If there was too much mortar, I scraped it off. If a measurement was wrong, I redid the whole thing. When I laid my first row of bricks, he inspected it with a level. Too much here. Not enough there. Crooked. I had to chip it all out and start over, fighting back tears. The second try earned nothing. The third got a grunt. The fourth got, "That'll do." From Jack, that was a standing ovation. Slowly, painfully, I learned. The blisters hardened into calluses. My skinny arms grew wiry and strong. I learned to carry loads that once seemed impossible. I learned to work in heat that made the air shimmer and in cold that cracked skin. And something else happened too, something I didn't have words for yet. I started to feel pride, not happiness. I still resented the work, still wished my weekends looked like other girls. But there was pride in making something real, in standing back and seeing a wall that existed because my hands put it there. By 12, I was a fixture on Jack's job sites. By 15, I could keep up. And while I was finding my place in a world of concrete and lumber, my life at school was quietly falling apart. The smell came first. No matter how much I scrubbed, construction clung to me: dust, sweat, cement. In a middle school classroom, it might as well have been a siren announcing my difference. "You smell like a garage," Cindy Matthews whispered once, loud enough for everyone to hear. Laughter followed me down the hallway. They started calling me Garage Girl. I hid my hands under desks, ashamed of their roughness. Nails cut brutally short, dirt that never fully came out. By the time 7th grade rolled around, I was living 2 lives and neither one fit. And then came the dance. The night I finally understood how different I'd become. The spring dance of 7th grade was supposed to be harmless. After weeks of begging, my mother bought me a dress from the discount rack at J.C. Penney's. Nothing fancy, simple blue fabric, slightly stiff, the kind that tried its best to look special. It was the first truly feminine thing I'd worn in years. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror that night, unsure what to do with myself. I borrowed my sister's plastic barrettes to pin my hair back, dabbed on drugstore makeup I didn't really understand. I didn't expect miracles. I didn't expect to be popular. I just wanted, for one evening, to feel normal. To pretend I spent my weekends at the mall instead of hauling bricks and mixing mortar. The gym smelled like punch and cheap perfume. Streamers drooped from the basketball hoops. Music echoed too loudly, vibrating through my ribs. I stood by the punch bowl, pretending I was waiting for someone. That's when Brad Cooper walked over. He wasn't the star athlete, not the richest kid either, but confident in a way that made girls giggle and straighten their shoulders when he passed. For one reckless second, my heart leapt. I thought he might ask me to dance. "Hey, Loretta," he said, smiling. "Hi," I answered, my voice coming out smaller than I wanted. "The guys and I have a bet going." "A bet?" Hope flickered anyway. "About what?" "They don't think you're really a girl under those work clothes," he said casually. So I said I'd find out. Before I could react, he grabbed my hand and flipped it palm up. "Jesus," he said loudly. "It's like sandpaper. Do you even own soap?" Laughter exploded around us. Boys near the gym door doubled over. Girls covered their mouths, eyes wide not with sympathy, but delight. My face burned so hot it felt like it might split. I yanked my hand back. "At least I know how to work," I shot back, the words tumbling out sharp and desperate. Brad laughed harder. "Yeah? What do you work at? A garage?" The nickname stuck instantly. Garage Girl. I ran, past the music, past the teachers pretending not to notice, past the exit and into the girls' bathroom, locking myself into a stall where I finally let myself cry. Hot, angry tears streaked down my face, ruining the makeup I'd tried so hard to apply. I cried for the girl I wanted to be, for the one who fit in, for the hands I couldn't hide. I didn't tell anyone about that night. Not my mother, who would have been crushed. Not my siblings, who had their own problems. And certainly not Uncle Jack, who would have either dismissed it or taken it as proof I needed to be tougher. Instead, I showed up to the next job site, angrier than ever. I swung the hammer harder, threw bricks with barely contained fury, stayed silent even when Jack raised an eyebrow at my sudden aggression. "Something bothering you?" he asked once, loading supplies into his truck. "No," I lied. He studied me for a moment, those pale eyes seeing more than I wanted. Then he nodded and went back to work. He never pushed, and somehow, that hurt more. As 8th grade began, I started skipping school whenever I could, not to smoke or mess around, but to work. I'd wait until Mom left for her shift, call the school pretending to be her, and claim I was sick. Then I'd take the bus to wherever Jack was working that day. The first time I showed up on a Tuesday morning, he frowned at his watch. "Shouldn't you be learning about George Washington or something?" "Teacher workday," I said, meeting his eyes. We both knew it wasn't true. He held my gaze, then shrugged. "Grab the level, wall won't check itself." That became our unspoken agreement. I didn't go to school. He didn't ask why. My grades collapsed. Notes came home. Counselors called meetings my mother was too tired to attend. I stopped caring. By 15, I belonged nowhere. Too rough for the girls, too female for the men. Caught in between, with calloused hands and nowhere to put them. Then came the afternoon everything broke. I was 16. Instead of taking the bus to the job site, I went home. I sat at our kitchen table alone and stared at my hands, really stared at them. Strong, capable, scarred, hands that could build walls but couldn't hold on to a childhood. When Uncle Jack's truck pulled up outside an hour later, I was ready. 6 years of resentment hardened into one sharp point. He knocked once, then stepped inside like he always did. "You sick?" he asked. "No," I said. "I'm done." "Done?" "Done working for you. Done missing school. Done being the freak with man hands." I waited for anger. It never came. Jack stood there, silent, unreadable. Then he nodded once. "Your choice." And he walked out. I thought I'd won. But as the door clicked shut, the house felt emptier than it ever had. Walking away from Uncle Jack felt like freedom for about 5 minutes. Then it started to feel like standing on the edge of something with no ground underneath. For 6 years, my life had been measured in early mornings and physical exhaustion, in walls built and mistakes corrected, in knowing exactly what was expected of me, even if I resented it. When that structure vanished, I didn't suddenly become normal. I became lost. I tried to reinvent myself the way 16-year-old girls are supposed to. I let my nails grow, though they broke easily and looked wrong on my hands. I saved up for a bottle of lotion that promised to soften the toughest skin. I borrowed my mother's mascara, practiced smiling in the mirror, tried to move like the other girls moved. Nothing stuck. The calluses faded only slightly. The knowledge in my head didn't disappear. And worst of all, I felt restless in a way I couldn't explain. Sitting in classrooms all day felt suffocating after years of movement and purpose. I finished high school without distinction. Average grades, no clubs, no friends to sign my yearbook with, inside jokes. I passed through the halls like a shadow. The guidance counselor talked about community college. My mother nodded politely. We all knew it wasn't happening. There was no money, and I didn't have the patience anymore to chase a future I couldn't picture, so I got a job at Kresge's department store in the mall. 5 days a week, I folded sweaters and rang up purchases, helped women choose between nearly identical shades of lipstick. The manager liked me because I showed up on time and didn't complain. Standing all day was easy after years on job sites. That's where I met Daniel Wright. He was 20, worked in the men's department, handsome in a clean, uncomplicated way. He had plans, big ones, according to him. Sales manager, corporate ladder, a real future. When he asked me out, I said yes before I could talk myself out of it. Dating him felt like slipping into a role I'd missed my cue for earlier in life. Movie nights, cheap dinners, kissing in his car. He liked that I wasn't demanding, that I didn't expect fancy gifts or constant reassurance. I liked that he seemed to know where he was going and that he wanted me to go there with him. 6 months later, we were engaged. 2 months after that, we were married in a small Lutheran church my mother occasionally attended. I was 18 and convinced I'd finally found my place. The first year of marriage taught me otherwise. Daniel believed a wife stayed home. My job at the store ended on his insistence. "No wife of mine needs to work," he said, like he was doing me a favor. The reality of being a housewife in a small apartment on a department store salary was nothing like the magazines. I was bored, isolated, and slowly realizing that Daniel's confidence was fragile, cracking whenever things didn't go his way. When I got pregnant, his reaction wasn't joy. "How are we supposed to afford a kid?" he snapped. Our son, Michael, was born in the summer of 1980. He cried constantly, as if he could sense the tension pressing in on us. I was exhausted. Daniel was resentful. The marriage unraveled faster than I could admit. The breaking point came one night when Michael was 7 months old. Daniel came home drunk, angry about being passed over for promotion again. I asked about the credit card charges I'd found, restaurants and bars I'd never been to. "You spying on me now?" he snarled. "I'm trying to figure out how we're going to pay rent. If you weren't so frigid, maybe I wouldn't need to go elsewhere," he shot back. Something snapped. Not into violence, into clarity. "I want a divorce," I said. He laughed. "With what money? What job? Who's going to want you?" A nobody with man hands and a baby? Man hands. For the first time, the insult didn't land the way he expected. I looked down at my hands. Hands that knew how to work, how to build, how to survive. I'll manage, I said. The divorce was ugly but quick. Daniel didn't fight for custody. He moved away with someone else and left me with bills and an apartment I couldn't afford. Michael and I moved back in with my mother. One night, after Michael finally fell asleep, she asked, "What will you do now?" I looked at my hands again. I'm going to use what I know. The next morning, I walked into Toledo Builders Supply. The owner, Frank Morris, recognized me immediately. "Jack Dean's girl," he said. I asked for a job. He laughed until I answered every question he threw at me about materials, mixes, load-bearing wood, and tools. 30 minutes later, he shook his head in disbelief. "Damn," he said. "Jack taught you well." I got the job. And for the first time since I'd walked away from Uncle Jack, my life started to feel solid again. 3 years later, the phone rang. My mother's voice was tight. "Loretta, it's your Uncle Jack. He had a heart attack. He's gone." And just like that, the man I never understood was gone forever, leaving behind a truth I wasn't ready for. The funeral was small, exactly the way Uncle Jack would have wanted it. No dramatic speeches, no glossy photo boards, just a modest brick building on the east side of Toledo, a closed casket with a folded American flag resting at one end, a handful of pickup trucks in the parking lot, men in worn jackets who nodded instead of hugging, men who knew him. I stood near the back of the room, with Michael's small hand wrapped around my finger. He was 4, too young to understand death, but old enough to sense when something serious was happening. The last time I'd seen Uncle Jack had been 7 years earlier, me 16 and furious, him silent and immovable. 7 years of silence. No wedding invitation, no baby announcement, no phone calls, and now this. The pastor spoke in generalities, words that could have belonged to anyone. One of the older contractors, Ray, told a short story about Jack's perfectionism, how he once tore down an entire wall because it was off by half an inch. He did things right, Ray said. Even when nobody was watching, that was it. No one talked about love, or family, or feelings. After the service, as people drifted away, a thin man in a cheap suit approached me. "Loretta Dean?" he asked, checking a notepad. "Yes, I'm Martin Grayson, your uncle's attorney. Could you stop by my office tomorrow morning? There are some matters to discuss." I nodded, surprised. As far as I knew, Uncle Jack didn't have much to his name. A truck, tools, a small house he rented. There wasn't anything to settle, or so I thought. The next morning, I dropped Michael at my mother's and drove downtown to a cramped law office above a barber shop. Grayson sat behind a desk piled with folders, glasses sliding down his nose. "Your uncle's will is straightforward," he said. "The house goes to your mother. His tools and truck are to be sold, proceeds divided among his former crew." That made sense. Then he reached down and placed a cardboard box on the desk. Ordinary, worn, tied with twine. "This," he said, "was to be given directly to you." I stared at it, something uneasy stirring in my chest. "There's one more thing." He slid a blue bank book across the desk. "This account was opened in your name in May of 1971. May 1971. The month Uncle Jack first took me to a job site. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Page after page of deposits, small but steady. Week after week, year after year. The final balance sat there, impossible. $6,742.18. "I don't understand," I whispered. "Those were your wages," Grayson said gently. "Your uncle calculated a fair rate and deposited it every week. When you stopped working with him, the deposits stopped. My wages. All those years I thought I was being used. All those Saturdays. All that pain. He'd been paying me the entire time." "There's a letter in the box," Grayson added, "and journals. They may explain things better than I can." I carried the box home like it might explode. At my kitchen table, I untied the twine and lifted the lid. Inside were composition notebooks, dozens of them, black and white marbled covers. On top sat an envelope with my name written in Uncle Jack's jagged handwriting. The letter was short. "Loretta, if you're reading this, I'm gone. These books explain better than I ever could. The money is yours. Always was. Use it smart, Jack." My hands shook as I opened the first notebook. May 8th, 1971. The first Saturday. Took Loretta to the Henderson job today. Ellen thinks I'm crazy. Maybe I am. Girls don't do construction. But better she learns to build than depend. She did good. Complained some, paid her $8.50. Put it in the account. Someday, she'll thank me. Even if she hates me now. My breath caught. Page after page followed. Notes about my progress, my frustration, my pride, his doubts, his hopes. Entries about protecting me from becoming trapped like other women he'd seen. About giving me skills no one could take away. About hands that meant freedom. And then I found the entry from the day I quit. She quit today. Expected it. Wants to be normal. Can't blame her. She's got what she needs now. Skills, knowledge, and money waiting if she's smart. Tears blurred the page. I finally understood. Uncle Jack hadn't been punishing me. He'd been preparing me. And everything I had built my survival, my strength, my independence, had started the morning I opened the door in my pajamas and he told me to get dressed. I sat there for a long time after that. The kitchen was quiet. Too quiet. The notebooks lay open in front of me, spread across the table like evidence in a case I'd never known was being built. All those years, I had told myself a simple story. That Uncle Jack was harsh because he didn't know how to be anything else. That he took my childhood because he believed suffering built character. That he used me, and I survived him in spite of that. But the man in those notebooks was someone else entirely. He wrote about my hands more than anything. Not the calluses, not the blisters. The strength. Hands mean freedom, he wrote once. Hands that know how to build don't have to beg. He wrote about my mother, about watching her work herself to exhaustion after my father left. About my cousin Diane, trapped in a marriage she couldn't escape because she had no money and no skills. That was the part that finally broke me. He hadn't been trying to make me tough. He'd been trying to make sure I never needed permission to leave. I read until my eyes burned. Until the past rearranged itself so completely I felt dizzy. Until the man I'd hated became someone I mourned for the first time, too late to tell him I finally understood. When I closed the last notebook, the house felt different, like walls had shifted while I wasn't looking. The money didn't change my past. It didn't erase the humiliation, or the loneliness, or the years I spent hating my own hands. But it explained why, when my marriage collapsed, I didn't collapse with it. Why I'd known without panic, without begging, that I would manage. Because I already had. That night, after Michael fell asleep, I sat at the table with the bank book in my hands and made a decision. Not about the money, about what it meant. Uncle Jack hadn't given me comfort. He hadn't given me softness. He'd given me something better, a foundation. And for the first time in my life, I understood that everything I had built, everything I would build, started with that first brutal lesson on a job site in 1971. No crying. Do it right. Stand on your own. The next morning, I walked into Toledo Builder Supply and asked for a job. And the life I thought I'd stumbled into by accident began to take its true shape. But that is the part people usually get wrong, because they think the story is about success. It isn't. It's about the man who never explained himself, who let me hate him so I could survive, and who made sure, without ever saying the words, that I would be okay. And that's what I needed to say before I handed over the keys. The first thing I did with the money was nothing. I let it sit. I needed to know I wasn't using it to escape something but to build something. That was Uncle Jack's rule, even if he never said it out loud. So I kept working at Toledo Builder Supply. I learned the business side the way I'd learned construction, quietly, carefully, paying attention to what lasted and what failed. I watched which materials contractors trusted and which ones they cursed under their breath. I noticed how often people, especially women, walked in already apologizing for not knowing what they needed. And one thought kept circling back. What if there was a place where knowledge wasn't a weapon? What if expertise was part of the product? I found a small, corrugated metal building on the industrial edge of town. A glorified garage with an office barely big enough for a desk. I signed a 1-year lease, used part of the money for inventory, and painted the walls myself at night after Michael fell asleep. Dean's Hardware and Supply opened in 1984. No ribbon cutting, no fanfare, just me, a few shelves, and a promise I made to myself. Do it right, or don't do it at all. The early days were terrifying. I rejected shipments that didn't meet my standards. I talked customers out of bad ideas, even when I needed the sale. I brought Michael to the store after school and set up a small play area behind the counter. Slowly, contractors came. Then more. Then women who'd been talked down to elsewhere, sold the wrong things, or told to just call a man. I didn't talk down, I explained. And that's how the workshop started. One weekend, a handful of people, no big plan, just hands-on tools, and the quiet moment when someone realized they could do this. By the end of the first year, I wasn't rich, but I was standing on my own. By the third, I'd outgrown the space. The money Uncle Jack saved for me was the seed. But the real inheritance was the discipline, the refusal to cut corners, the belief that skills mean options. Everything else followed. The store grew. The programs grew. Women found their footing. Michael grew up watching work mean dignity, not fear. And somehow, without planning it, I built the thing Uncle Jack was trying to give me all along: choice. Now, decades later, I stand at the front of the store again, keys in my hand, footsteps echoing as my kids arrive, ready to take over. My hands are older now, slower, still strong. I look around one last time and think about a man who never once told me he was proud, but made damn sure I never needed him. "Good work, kid," I imagine him saying. I lock the door behind me, not as an ending, but as proof that the foundation held. I don't make speeches at the handover. Michael expects one. Sarah probably does too. The mayor definitely does. But when everyone gathers near the front counter, when the cameras come out and the polite applause dies down, I realize something simple. I've already said what mattered. I shake hands. I sign the last paper. I place the keys in Michael's palm and close his fingers around them the same way my uncle once showed me how to hold a trowel. "Not like it's fragile," I tell him quietly. "Like it's part of you." He nods. He understands more than I ever did at 10. People clap. Someone hugs me. Someone else calls me an inspiration. I smile because that's what you do. But inspiration was never the point. After the crowd thins, after the doors are locked again, this time by someone else, I step outside. The air smells like rain. Toledo hasn't changed much that way. Still gray. Still stubborn. Still standing. I sit in my truck for a moment with my hands resting on the steering wheel. These hands, not soft, never were. Probably never will be. They built walls. They built a business. They built a way out when I needed one. For years, I hated them because they made me different, because they marked me as something other girls weren't supposed to be. Now I know better. They were never a flaw. They were a gift. Uncle Jack never said, "I love you." He never explained himself. He never gave me comfort or reassurance or gentle encouragement. He let me believe he was cruel because that was easier than admitting he was afraid of a world that chewed women up and trapped them when they had no way to leave. So he taught me to build, brick by brick, skill by skill, choice by choice. And when I didn't need him anymore, he stepped back without complaint. Teaching someone so well they don't need you. That was his love. I start the engine and pull out of the lot, leaving the sign behind me for the last time. Dean's Hardware and Building Supply. Established 1984. The foundation held.